to anyone who doubts my slime knowledge, I'm glad we got this on live. That was amazing. I'm so glad someone asked so that I would go look at it while we were live so that no one could accuse me of, like, whatever. My nails are not good, actually. This one is the worst. It hurts so bad right now. I don't like it. It's not fun. Feels awful. Let's get a new bookmark for this new book from our box of Anya bookmarks. This one says, light a fire that must be heard. Sometimes I like to make a big breakfast for my kids to prove to myself why I don't make breakfast. Oh no. How is everyone this morning? Are you guys ready for another rip-roaring day with me? And we have Roll for Slime tonight. Oh my gosh. We have Roll for Slime, craziness. It is a good quote. Today is new book day. We're so excited. Start a new book. Gonna be exciting to go back into the Chris Colfer world. What time is Roll for Slime? 4:30. 4:30. I'll be on at 4:30 for Roll for Slime. It'll be so much fun. I gotta make labels today. Maybe I'll sit with you guys while I make labels. Making labels is the most boring job ever. Yes, 4:30 Pacific time. That's exactly right. I know. There was someone on my live yesterday while I was making that clear slime that was like, it's impossible for Claire Slime to clear up in a day. She's lying. I was like, come back tomorrow if you don't believe me. And someone did come back and asked me on this live, and we proved them right. Yeah, we proved it right. Yeah. They like wouldn't let it go. Like, it's normal for someone to say something to me. Oh yeah, no problem, Chirpy. It's normal for someone to say something like that to me, and then when I say, oh yeah, Will, they go, oh, okay, sorry, I didn't know. But this person was like, no, I used to be a big slimer that went to conventions. There's no way that you could do that. I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna right now in front of your face. Here it is, and I did it. Sorry, you're wrong. I don't know what to tell you. They were like, I'm going to report you for bullying because you're so mean to me because you told me I was wrong. I was like, okay, well, you are wrong. So it was wild. It was absolute wild times. That was the live where none of the mods believed I was actually live. Maybe that's why that happened, because we had no mods. All right. So today we are starting a Taylor. I would have been like, oh yeah, me too. What was your sign? Yeah, I should have said that. I should have been like, oh, which conventions did you go to? Because I went to all of them. Go ahead, tell me where you were. You couldn't see that I was live either. That's so weird. Yes, that is the one, Becca. So we are starting Tale of Magic today. It sounds to me from the blurb like we are in the world of the Land of Stories, even though it's not a Bailey Twins novel, which is okay by me, right? I mean, like, it says we're going to run into some familiar characters. We're going to get some new characters. I think overall, I would consider that a win. I hope you all do as well. So we're going to jump right into this today, and then we're just going to do a little bit because I do have a busy day, but I will be back on in a little bit to do writing sprints, and then we'll do labels, and then we'll do Roll for Slime. Such a good day. Oh, actually, you know what? I have to make white glue base early today, so that might be the first thing we do because that needs to settle. I need a little bit more white base for Roll for Slime. So we'll do that first, and then we'll write, and then we'll do labels, and then we'll do Roll for Slime. That'll be our order of operations for the day. Everybody good? Does anyone have any questions about that agenda? But it takes 80 years to settle. I know. All right. Here we go. Back into the Chris Colfer universe. My favorite place to be, literally. Prologue. An unexpected audience. Magic was outlawed in all 4 kingdoms, and that was putting it lightly. Legally, magic was the worst criminal act a person could commit, and socially, there was nothing considered more despicable. In most areas, just being associated with a convicted witch or warlock was an offense punishable by death. In the Northern Kingdom, perpetrators and their families were put on trial, promptly burned at the stake, and in the Eastern Kingdom, very little evidence was needed to sentence the accused and their loved ones to hang at the gallows. Eesh. And in the Western Kingdom, suspected witches and warlocks were drowned without any trial whatsoever. The executions were rarely committed by law enforcement or kingdom officials. Most commonly, the punishments were carried out by mobs of angry citizens who took the law into their own hands. Although frowned upon, the brutal sport was completely tolerated by kingdom sovereigns. In truth, the leaders were delighted that their people had something besides government to direct their anger toward. So the monarchs welcomed the distraction and even encouraged it during times of political unrest. He or she who chooses the path of magic has chosen the path of condemnation, King Nobleton of the Northern claimed. Meanwhile, his negligent choices were causing the worst famine in his kingdom's history. Sounds familiar. We must never show sympathy to people with such abominable priorities, Queen Industria of the East declared, and then immediately raised taxes to finance a summer palace. Magic is an insult to God and nature, and a danger to morality as we know it, King Warworth of the West remarked. Luckily for him, the statement distracted his people from the rumors about the 8 illegitimate children he had fathered with 8 different mistresses. Chris, please. Once a witch or warlock was exposed, persecution was nearly impossible to escape. Many fled into the thick and dangerous forest known as the In-Between that grew between borders. Unfortunately, the In-Between was home to dwarves, elves, goblins, trolls, ogres, and other species humankind had banished over the years. The witches and the warlocks seeking asylum in the woods usually found a quick and violent demise at the hands of a barbaric creature. The only mercy whatsoever for witch and warlock kind, if it could even be considered mercy, was found in the Southern Kingdom. As soon as King Champion the 14th inherited the throne from his father, the late Champion the 13th, his first royal decree was to abolish the death penalty for convicted practitioners of magic. Instead, the offenders were sentenced to life imprisonment with hard labor, and they would be reminded every day how grateful they should really be. The king did not amend the law purely out of goodness of his heart, but as an attempt to make peace with a traumatic memory. When Champion was a child, his own mother was beheaded for suspicious interest in magic. The charge came from Champion the 13th himself, so no one thought to question the accusation or investigate the queen's innocence, although Champion the 13th's motives were questioned on the day following his wife's execution, when he married a much younger and prettier woman. Since the queen's untimely end, Champion the 14th had counted down the days until he could avenge his mother by destroying his father's legacy. And as soon as the crown was placed on his head, Champion the 14th devoted most of his reign to erasing Champion the 13th from the Southern Kingdom's history. Now, in old age, King Champion the 14th spent the majority of his time doing the least he possibly could. Well, when you're old. His royal decrees had been reduced to grunts and eye rolls. Instead of royal visitations, the king lazily waved to the crowds from the safety of a speeding carriage, and the closest thing he made to royal statements anymore were complaints about his castle halls being too long and the staircases being too steep. Champion made a hobby of avoiding people. Same. Especially his self-righteous family. He ate his meals alone and went to bed early. He slept in late and cherished his lengthy afternoon naps, and God have mercy on the poor soul that awoke him before he was ready. Although on one particular afternoon, the king was prematurely woken not by a careless grandchild or clumsy chambermaid, but by a sudden change in the weather. Champion awoke with a fright to heavy raindrops thudding against his chamber windows and powerful winds whistling down the chimney. It had been such a sunny and clear day when he went to bed, so the storm was quite a surprise for the groggy sovereign. "I've risen," Champion announced. The king waited for the nearest servant to scurry in and help him from his tall bed, but his call was unanswered. Champion aggressively cleared his throat. I said I've risen, he called again, but strangely there was still no response. The king's joints cracked as he begrudgingly climbed out of bed, and he mumbled a series of curse words as he hopped across the stone floor to retrieve his robe and slippers. Once he was dressed, Champion burst through his chamber door, intending to scold the first servant that he laid eyes on. Why is no one responding? What could possibly be more important than... Champion fell silent, looked around in disbelief. The drawing room outside his chambers was usually bustling with maids and butlers, but now it was completely empty. It's called A Tale of Magic. Even the soldiers who guarded the doors day and night had abandoned their posts. The king peered into the hallway beyond the drawing room, and it was just as empty. Not only was it vacant of servants and soldiers, but all the light had disappeared too. Every candle in the chandeliers, all the torches on the walls had been extinguished. Hello? Champion called down the hall. Is anyone there? But all he heard was his own voice echoing back to him. The king cautiously moved through the castle, searching for another living soul, but he found only more and more darkness at every turn. It was incredibly unsettling. He had lived in this castle since he was a small boy, and he had never seen it so lifeless. Champion looked back through every window he passed, but the rain and fog blocked his view of anything outside. Eventually, the king rounded the corner of a long hallway and spotted flickering lights coming from his private study. The door was wide open, and someone was enjoying a fire inside. It would have been very inviting of a sight if the circumstances weren't so eerie. With each step he took, the king's heart beat faster and faster, and he anxiously peered into the doorway to see who or what was waiting inside. Oh, look, the king is awake, finally. Now, girls, we must be respectful to His Majesty. The king found 2 young girls and a beautiful woman sitting on the sofa in his study. Upon his entrance, they quickly rose from their seats and bowed in his direction. Your Majesty, what a pleasure to make your acquaintance, the woman said. She wore a bright, elegant purple gown that matched her large, bright eyes, and curiously, only one glove, which covered her left arm. Her dark hair was tucked beneath an elaborate fascinator with flowers, feathers, and a short veil that fell over her face. The girls couldn't have been older than 10 and wore plain white robes with cloth head wraps. Who the heck are you? Champion asked. Oh, forgive me, the woman said. I'm Madam Weatherberry, and these are my apprentices, Miss Tangerina Turkin and Miss Skyline Lavender. Oh, we've gone back in time. Okay, this is before. Interesting. Where do you think the fairy godmother falls into this timeline? I hope you don't mind that we made ourselves at home in your study. We've traveled an awfully long way to be here, and we couldn't resist a nice fire while we waited. Yeah, it seems like it is a prequel. Madam Weatherberry seemed to be a very warm and charismatic woman. She was the last person the king had expected to find in an abandoned castle, which many ways made the woman and the situation even stranger. Madam Weatherberry extended her right arm to shake Champion's hand, but he did not accept the friendly gesture. Instead, the monarch looked his unexpected guest up and down and then took a full step backward. The girls giggled and eyed the paranoid king as if they were looking into his soul and found it laughable. This is a private room in a royal residence, the King Champion reprimanded them. How dare you enter without my permission? I could have you whipped for this. Please pardon our intrusion, Madam Weatherberry said. It's rather out of character for us to barge in someone's home unannounced, but I'm afraid I had no choice. You see, I've been writing to your secretary, Mr. Fellows, for quite some time, hoping I would be able to schedule an audience with you, but unfortunately, Mr. Fellows never responded to any of my letters. He rather is an inefficient man, if you don't mind me saying so. Perhaps it's time to replace him. Anyway, there's a very timely matter I'm eager to discuss with you, so here we are.
How did this woman get inside?
The king shouted into the empty castle.
Where in God's name is everyone?
I'm afraid all your subjects are indisposed at the moment, Madam Weatherbury informed him.
What do you mean indisposed?
Champion barked. Oh, it's nothing to be concerned about, just a little enchantment for our security. I promise all your servants and soldiers will return once we've had the time to talk. I find diplomacy is much easier when there are no distractions. Don't you? Madam Weatherbury spoke in a calm manner, but one word made Champion's eye grow wide with his blood pressure soaring.
Enchantment?
The king gasped.
You're a witch.
Champion pointed his finger at Madam Weatherbury in such a panic that he pulled every muscle in his right shoulder. The king groaned as he clutched his arm, and his guest snickered at his dramatic display. No, your majesty, I am not a witch, she said.
Don't you lie to me, woman, the king shouted. Only witches make enchantments.
No, your majesty, that is not true.
You're a witch, and you've cursed this castle with your magic. You will pay for this.
I see that listening isn't your strong suit, Madam Weatherbury said. Perhaps if I repeat myself 3 times, the message shall sink in. I find it's a helpful tool with slow learners. Here we go. I am not a witch. I am not a witch. I'm not a...
If you're not a witch, then what are you?
It didn't matter how loud the king yelled or how agitated he became. Madam Weatherbury's polite demeanor never faded. Actually, your majesty, that's among the topics that I would like to discuss with you this evening, she said. Now, we don't wish to take any more of your time than necessary, so would you please take a seat that we may begin? As if pulled by an invisible hand, the chair behind the king's desk moved on its own, and Madam Weatherbury gestured for him to sit. Champion wasn't certain that he had a choice in the matter, so he took a seat and nervously glanced back and forth at the visitors. The girls sat on the sofa and folded their hands neatly in their laps. Madam Weatherbury sat between her apprentices and flipped her veil upward so that she could look the sovereign directly in the eye. First, I want to thank your majesty, Madam Weatherbury began. You're the only ruler in history to show the magical community any mercy. Granted, some might say life imprisonment and hard labor is worse than death, but it's still a step in the right direction. And I'm confident we can turn these steps into strides if we just... Your majesty, is something wrong? I don't seem to have your full attention. Bizarre buzzing and swishing noises had captured the king's curiosity as she spoke. He looked around the study but couldn't find the source of the odd noises.
Sorry, I thought I heard something, the king said. You were saying?
I was professing my gratitude for the mercy you've shown the magical community.
The king grunted with a disgust. Well, you're mistaken if you think I have any empathy for the magical community, he scoffed. On the contrary, I believe magic is just as foul and unnatural as the other sovereigns do. My concern is with the people who use magic to take advantage of the law.
And that's commendable, sir, Madam Weatherbury said. Your devotion to justice is what separates you from the other monarchs. Now, I'd like to enlighten your perspective on magic so that you may continue to make this kingdom fairer and a safer place for all your people. After all, justice cannot exist for one if it does not exist for all. Their conversation had just begun, and the king was already starting to resent it.
What do you mean, enlighten my perspective? He sneered.
Your Majesty, the way magic is criminalized and stigmatized is a great injustice of our time. But with the proper modifications and amendments, we can change all that. Together, we can create a society that encourages all walks of life and raises them to their greatest potential. And Your Majesty, Excuse me, are you listening? I seem to have lost you again. Once more the king was distracted by the mysterious buzzing and swishing sounds. His eyes searched the study more frantically than before, and he only heard every other word that Madam Weatherberry said.
I must have misunderstood you, he said. For a moment it sounded as though you were suggesting the legalization of magic.
Oh, there was no misunderstanding, Madam Weatherberry said with a laugh. The legalization of magic is exactly what I'm suggesting. Champion suddenly sat up in his seat and clenched the armrest of his chair. Madam Weatherberry had his undivided attention now. She couldn't possibly be implying something so ludicrous.
What's wrong with you, woman? The king sneered. Magic can never be legalized.
Actually, sir, it's very much in the realm of possibility, Madam Weatherberry said. All that is required is a simple decree that decriminalizes the act, and then, in good time, the stigma surrounding it will diminish.
I would sooner decriminalize murder and thievery, the king declared. The Lord clearly states in the Book of Faith that magic is a horrendous sin and therefore a crime in this kingdom. And if crimes didn't have consequences, we would live in utter chaos.
No, that is where you're mistaken, Your Majesty, she said. You see, magic is not the crime the world thinks it is.
Of course it is, he objected. I have witnessed magic being used to trick and torment innocent people. I've seen the bodies of children who were slaughtered for potions and spells. I've been to the villages plagued by curses and hexes, so don't you dare defend magic to me. Madam, the magical community will never receive an ounce of sympathy or understanding from this sovereign.
Champion couldn't have made his opposition any clearer, but Madam Weatherberry moved to the edge of her seat and smiled, as if they had found common ground. This may surprise you, sir, but I completely agree, she said.
You do? He asked with a suspicious gaze.
Oh, yes, completely, she repeated. I believe those who torment innocent people should be punished for their actions, and harshly, I might add. There's just one minor flaw in your reasoning. The situations you've witnessed aren't caused by magic, but witchcraft.
The king tensed his brow and glanced at Madam Weatherberry as if she was speaking a foreign language. Witchcraft? He said mockingly. I've never heard of such a thing.
Then allow me to explain, Madam Weatherberry said. Witchcraft is a ghastly and destructive practice. It stems from a dark desire to deceive and disrupt. Only people with wicked hearts are capable of witchcraft. But I believe they deserve whatever fate is brought upon them by themselves. But magic, something else entirely. At its core, magic is a pure and positive art. It's meant to help and heal those in need, and can only come from those with goodness in their hearts.
The king sank back into his chair. His head was dizzy with confusion.
Oh dear, I've overwhelmed you, Madam Weatherberry said. Let me simplify it for you then. Magic is good. Magic is good. Magic is good. Witchcraft is bad. Witchcraft is bad. Witchcraft is...
Don't patronize me, woman. I heard you, the king griped. Give me a moment to wrap my head around it. Champion let out a long sigh and massaged his temples. It was unusually difficult for him to process information so shortly after a nap, but this was entirely a different beast. The king covered his eyes and concentrated as if he were reading a book behind his eyelids. You're saying magic is not the same as witchcraft?
Correct, Madam Weatherberry said with an encouraging nod. Apples and oranges.
And the two are different in nature.
Polar opposites, sir.
So, if not witches, what do you call people who practice magic?
Madam Weatherberry held her head high with pride. We call ourselves fairies, sir.
Fairies? The king asked.
Yes, fairies, she repeated. Now, do you understand my desire to enlighten your perspective? The world's concern isn't with fairies who practice magic, it's with witches who commit witchcraft. But tragically, we've been grouped together and condemned as one for the same centuries.
Fortunately, with my guidance and your influence, we're more than capable of rectifying this. I'm afraid I disagree, the king said. I beg your pardon, Madam Weatherbury replied. One may steal because of greed, another may steal for survival, but they're both thieves. It doesn't matter if one has goodness in his heart. But sir, I thought I made it perfectly clear that witchcraft is a crime, not magic. Yes, but both have been considered sinful since the beginning of time, Champion went on. Do you know how difficult it is to redefine something for society? It took me decades to convince my kingdom that potatoes aren't poisonous, and people still avoid them at the markets. Madam Weatherbury shook her head in disbelief. Are you comparing an innocent race of people to potatoes, sir? I understand your objective, madam, but the world isn't ready for heck, I'm not ready for it. If you want to save the fairies from unfair punishment, then I suggest you teach them to keep quiet and resist the urge to do magic. That would be far easier than convincing a stubborn world to change its ways. Resist the urge, sir, you can't be serious. Why not? Normal people live above temptation every day. Because you're implying that magic comes with an off switch like some sort of choice. Of course magic is a choice. No, it's not! For the first time since their interaction had begun, Madam Weatherbury's pleasant temper changed. A shard of deep-seated anger pierced through her cheery disposition, and her face fell into a stony, intimidating glare. It was as if Champion were facing a different woman altogether, one who should be feared. Magic is not a choice, Madam Weatherbury said. Ignorance is a choice. Hatred is a choice. Violence is a choice. But someone's existence is never a choice or a fault. It's certainly not a crime. You would be wise to educate yourself. Champion was too afraid to say another word. It may have been his imagination, but the king could have sworn the storm outside was intensifying as Madam Weatherbury's temper rose. It was obviously a state she rarely surrendered to because her apprentices seemed as uneasy as the king. The fairy closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and calmed herself before continuing the discussion. Perhaps we should give His Majesty a demonstration, Madam Weatherbury suggested. Tangerina, Skyline, will you please show King Champion why magic isn't a choice? The apprentices exchanged an eager grin. They had been waiting for this. They hopped to their feet and removed their robes and unwound their head wraps. Tangerine revealed a dress made from dripping patches of honeycomb and a beehive of bright orange hair that was the home of a live swarm of bumblebees. Skyline uncovered a sapphire bathing suit, and instead of hair, she had a continuous stream of water that flowed down her body, evaporating as it reached her feet. Champion's mouth dropped open as he laid eyes on what the girls had been concealing. In all his years on the throne, he had never seen magic so materialized in a person's appearance. The mystery of strange buzzing and swishing noises was solved. My God, the king said breathlessly. Are all fairies like this? Magic affects each of us differently, Madam Weatherbury said. Some people lead completely normal lives until their magic presents itself, while other people show physical traits from the moment that they are born. That can't be true, the king argued. If people were born with magical features, prisons would be filled with infants, and our court would have never imprisoned a baby. Madam Weatherbury lowered her head and looked to the floor with a sad gaze. That's because most fairies are killed or abandoned at birth. Their parents fear the consequences of bringing a magical child into the world, so they do what is necessary to avoid punishment. It was a miracle I found Tangerine and Skyline before they were harmed, but many aren't so lucky. Your Majesty, I understand your reservation, but what's happening to these children is cruel and primitive. Decriminalizing magic is about much more than injustice. It's about saving innocence. Surely you can find sympathy and understanding in your heart for that. Champion knew that he lived in a harsh world, but he had been oblivious to such horrors. He rocked back and forth in his chair, his reluctant waged war with his empathy. Madam Weatherbury could tell that she was making progress with the king, so she used a sentiment she had been saving for just the right moment. Think how different the world would be if it had a little bit more compassion for the magical community. Think how different your life would be, Your Majesty. Suddenly, Champion's mind was flooded with memories of his mother. He remembered her face,
her smile, her laugh, but most prominently of all, he remembered the tight embrace that they shared just before she was dragged to her untimely death. Despite how rusty his memory had become with age, those images were forever branded into his brain.
I would like to help you, but decriminalizing magic may be more problematic than productive. Forcing the public to accept what they hate and fear could cause a rebellion. Witch hunts, as we know it, could escalate into full-fledged, and I'm not going to say this word on TikTok because of what's going on here, but memomide.
Believe me, I am no stranger to human nature, Madame Weatherbury said. The legalization of magic can't be rushed. On the contrary, it must be handled gently, with patience and persistence. If we want to change the world's opinion, we must encourage, not force, and nothing encourages people like a good spectacle. A nervous tension spread over the king's face. Spectacle? He asked fearfully. What sort of spectacle are you planning? Madame Weatherbury smiled, and her bright eyes grew even brighter. This was the part she had been waiting for. When I first met Tangerine and Skyline, they were captives of their own magic, she told him. No one could be near Tangerine without being attacked by her bees, and poor Skyline was living in a lake because she soaked everything she stepped on. So I took the girls under my wing and taught them to control their magic, and now they're perfectly functioning young adults. It breaks my heart to think of all the children out there who are struggling with who or what they are, so I've decided to open my doors and give them a proper education. You're going to start a school? The king asked. Precisely, she said. I call it Madame Weatherbury's Academy for Young Practitioners of Magic, although it's still a working title. And where would this academy be? He asked. I've recently secured a few acres southeast in between. The in-between? The king protested. Woman, are you mad? The in-between is much too dangerous for children. You can't start a school there. Oh, I won't argue that, Madame Weatherbury said. The in-between is exceptionally dangerous for people unfamiliar with its territories. However, there are many members of the magical community, including myself, who have lived quite comfortably in the in-between for decades. The land I've acquired is very remote and private. I've installed all the proper protections to guarantee my students are safe. Once I've trained my pupils... But how is a magical academy going to achieve legalization of magic? Once I've trained my pupils to master their abilities, we'll slowly introduce ourselves to the world. We'll use our magic to heal the sick and help those in need. After some time, word of our compassion will have spread through the kingdoms. Fairies will become examples of generosity, and we will win people's affection. The world will see all the good that magic has to offer, and their opinion of magic will change, and the magical community will finally be embraced. Champion scratched at his chin in contemplation of Madame Weatherbury's lavish plan. Of all the details she had given him, she was forgetting the most important one, his involvement. You seem very capable of doing this on your own. What do you want from me? Naturally, I want your consent, she said. Fairies want to be trusted, and the only way we'll earn trust is by doing things the right way. So I would like your official permission to travel openly through the Southern Kingdom as I recruit students. I would like your promise that these children and families that I encounter will be spared prosecution. My mission is to offer these youngsters a better life. I don't want to put anyone in legal jeopardy. It would be very difficult convincing parents to let their children attend a school for magic. Having their sovereign's blessing will make it just that much easier, especially if that blessing is in writing. Madame Weatherbury waved a hand over the king's desk, and a gold piece of parchment appeared before him. Everything she had requested was already written out. All she needed was the king's signature. Champion anxiously rubbed his legs as he read the document over and over again. This could go wrong in so many ways, the king said. If my subjects found out that I gave a fairy permission to take their children to a magical school, there would be rioting in the streets. My people would want my head on a platter. Well, in that case, tell your people that you order me to cleanse your kingdom of the magical children, she suggested. Say that in an effort to create a future without magic, you had the young rounded up and taken away. I found the more vulgar a declaration, the more that humankind embraces it.
Still, that's a gamble for both of us. Having my permission doesn't guarantee your protection. Aren't you worried about your own safety?
Your Majesty, I'll remind you that I made the staff of your entire castle disappear into thin air. Tangerine controls a storm of bees, and Skyline has enough water flowing through her body to flood a canyon. We can protect ourselves. Despite her testimony, the king appeared more fearful than convinced. Madame Weatherbury was so close to getting what she wanted, she had to extinguish Champion's doubt before it overpowered him. Luckily, she still had one more weapon in her arsenal to gain his approval. Tangerine, Skyline, would you please give the king and me a moment alone? She asked. It was evident that Tangerine and Skyline didn't want to miss any part of Madame Weatherbury's conversation with the king, but they respected their chaperone's wishes and waited in the hall. Once the door was shut behind them, Madame Weatherbury leaned toward Champion and looked deep into his eyes with a grave expression. Thank you, Maddie. I'm glad that you like it. Sir, are you aware of the northern conflict? She asked. If the king's bulging eyes were any indication, Champion was more than aware. Just the mention of the northern conflict had a paralyzing effect on him, and he struggled to respond.
How on earth do you know about that? He inquired. That's classified matter.
The magical kingdom may be small and divided, but word spreads quickly when one of us is, well, causing a scene.
Causing a scene? Is that what you people call it?
Your Majesty, please keep your voice down, she said, and then nodded to the door. Bad news has an easy way of finding young ears. My girls would worry themselves sick if they knew about what we were discussing. Champion could relate because he was starting to feel sick himself. Being reminded of the subject was like being reacquainted with a ghost that he thought he had put to rest.
Why are you even mentioning such a horrible thing? He asked.
Because right now there's no guarantee the northern conflict won't cross the border and arrive at your front door, Madame Weatherbury warned him.
The king shook his head. No, that won't happen. King Nobleton assured me that he took care of the situation. He gave us his word.
King Nobleton lied to you. He told the other sovereigns that he had the conflict under control because he's humiliated by how severe the situation has become. Over half of the northern kingdom has perished. 3/4 of his army is gone, and what's left shrinks daily. The king blames the loss on famine because he's terrified that he'd lose his throne if people knew the truth. All the color faded from Champion's face, and he trembled in his seat.
Well, can anything be done, or am I supposed to sit and wait to perish myself?
Well, recently there's been hope, Madame Weatherbury said. Nobleton has appointed a new commander, General White, to lead the remaining defenses. So far, the general has sequestered the situation more successfully than his predecessors.
Well, that's something, the king said.
I pray General White will resolve the matter, but you must be prepared if he does fail, she said. And should the conflict cross into the southern kingdom, having an academy of trained fairies in your corner would be very beneficial.
You believe your students could stop the conflict? He asked with desperate eyes.
Well, yes, Your Majesty, she said with complete confidence. I believe my future students will accomplish many things the world believes impossible today. But first, they'll need a place to learn and a teacher to guide them. Champion went very still as he thought about the proposition.
Yes. Well, yes, that could be extremely beneficial, he said to himself. Naturally, I'll have to consult my advisory council of high justices before giving you an answer.
Actually, sir, Madame Weatherbury said, I believe this is a matter we can settle without consulting the high justices. They just tend to be a rather old-fashioned group, and I would hate for their stubborn tendencies to get in our way. Besides, there have been discussions circulating the country that you should be aware of. Many of your people are convinced the high justices are the true rulers of the southern kingdom, and that you are nothing but their puppet.
What? That's outrageous, the king exclaimed. I'm sovereign. My will is law.
Indeed, she said. Any able-minded person knows that. However, the rumors do remain. If I were you, I would start disproving those nasty theories by defying the high justices every so often. And I can't think of a better way to do that than by signing the document before you. Champion nodded as he considered her warning, and eventually her persuasion guided him to a decision.
Well, very well, the king said. You may recruit 2 students from the Southern Kingdom for your magical school, 1 boy and 1 girl, but that's all. And you must receive written permission from your pupils' guardians, or they're not allowed to attend your school.
I confess I was hoping for a better arrangement, but I will take what I can get, Madam Weatherbury said. You do have a deal.
The king retrieved a quill and ink from his desk and made amendments to the golden document. Once he was finished with his corrections, Champion signed the agreement and authenticated it with the wax seal of his family's royal crest. Madam Weatherbury jumped to her feet and clapped in celebration.
Oh, what a wonderful moment this is. Tangerine, Skyline, come in. The king has granted our request.
The apprentices hurried into the study and became giddy at the sight of the king's signature. Tangerine rolled up the document. Skyline tied it with a silver ribbon.
Thank you so much, Your Majesty,
Madam Weatherbury said, lowering her fascinator's veil over her face.
I promise you won't regret this.
The king snorted skeptically and rubbed his tired eyes.
I pray that you know what you're doing, because if you don't, I'll tell the kingdom I was bewitched and bribed by a...
Champion gasped when he looked up. Madam Weatherbury and her apprentices had vanished into thin air. The king hurried into the doorway to see if they had dashed into the hallway, but it was just as empty as before. Within moments of their departure, all the candles and torches throughout the castle were magically relit. Footsteps echoed down the halls. All the servants and soldiers returned to their duties. The king went to the window and noticed that the storm had disappeared, but Champion found little comfort in the clearing weather. On the contrary, it was impossible for the king to feel anything but dread as he skimmed the northern skies, knowing somewhere on the horizon the true storm awaited.
Oh, what? This is amazing! Oh my gosh, it's so good. Oh.
Okay. I'm into it. It's a prequel for us. I love a good prequel. Oh, so fun. So sneaky. So much. I wonder who Bristol ends up being like in the history. No, I think there's a couple. I think there's at least 2 so far. In this book, it's written that there are 2, right, Becca? Right? I don't know how many there are in the series total, but right now, this book was published in 2019 and paperback in 2020, and it shows that there are 2. So maybe there's 2, maybe there's 3 by now. I don't know. We'll have to look, but fantastic. So far, it's A Tale of Magic, and book 2 is called A Tale of Witchcraft. So whatever that means. Very exciting. I love it so far. Really cool. I wonder, I can't remember who ends up in the Northern Kingdom. King Champion, I wonder who his kids end up being. I can't remember which princess, you know what I mean? I can't remember who was in the Northern Kingdom. Anyway, it's fantastic. Did you all love it so far? Or is it just me? Like, I am enthralled. I love everything he does. This man, he could write anything and I will read it, truly. Like, what a gem. For anyone who missed any parts, I will obviously download this and upload it to the YouTubes for us to have in a playlist, because this is one of those books that we're going to want the whole playlist for the whole series of, I think. Wow. I love Madam Weatherbury already. I don't know if she's going to end up being good or bad, but I love her. I don't even care. She's great. He's such a good storyteller. He's so like, he's so good. He's so good. Okay, so I'm going to go for a little bit and then I'll be back to make base slime soon, probably within an hour. And then we'll do writing and we'll do labels and whatever, because I'm going to start mailing pre-orders tomorrow. They're almost all done. So that's good. And that's all. All right, I'll see you guys soon. What time is it? It's 9:15. I'll probably be back on to do base slime, I don't know, maybe like 10:30, something like that. Okay, bye guys, see you later.